All right, we are now on Facebook and we are recording.
Okay. Am
So I'll
I could
I will just quickly
sorry.
introduce in the beginning. So hello everyone.
Yeah.
I'm Parisa Asher. Me and David are the co-founders of the STEMinate organization, and we're so happy to be hosting a summer camp series along with the Henrico County 4-H Center called Train Your Brain, where we just introduce students to a variety of STEM subjects and how they can be applied to everyday life. And so David, if you want to go on and kind of discuss what you'll be presenting this week.
Yeah. So let me do I share oh, can you give
Yeah,
me
just
access
one.
to
Yeah, just 1 second. I got
okay.
to make you a co-host.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so while she's doing that, I'll just introduce um
There you
so we're gonna
are.
be talking about evolution today and natural selection and the founders of evolution and what that's all about. And then we'll have some activities at the end to test your skills on what you've learned today during the lesson. So if I share screen. Let me make this a separate window. Okay. Can you guys see that? Evolution PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe, and then just hit the present feature.
Are we good?
Yes.
And then also, like previous lessons, I highly recommend
Okay.
everyone watching to take notes so that it can just help you remember, and then probably with the Kahoot game as well. So yeah.
Yay, I love Kahoot,
Oh, okay.
but I hate the questions. Too hard.
Okay. So
Yeah, so we're gonna be doing a Kahoot. Yeah. Okay. So is everyone ready?
I need some taffies here. Just a minute. Fixing the camera.
Okay, let me know when you guys have your papers and pencils and are ready to start.
Not ready to start yet. Just a minute.
Okay.
There you go. Yes. Set up. I'm ready.
Are we ready? Okay.
Ready.
So as I said, today we'll be talking about Darwin, Charles Darwin, and his findings of natural selection and the theory of evolution. So here's our lesson plan. So we'll be going over 4 things today. The first is evolution and what that's about. The second is the history of Charles Darwin and how he has come to discover the theory of natural selection. The third topic is the process of natural selection and what that entails. And lastly, we'll be doing some review and doing some activities regarding this topic. So first is evolution. So what is evolution? In simple terms, evolution is change over time. So over a long period of time, right, what happens to something, whether it's an animal species or whatever you're thinking about, right? But in biology, as I said, it's the change that occurs within a population of organisms, of living things between one generation and the next. And this will lead to the eventual creation of new species over time. So the theory of evolution is very widely accepted by all scientists all over the world, and it's central to the modern science of biology. And there have been many tests and experiments that have been done to find evidence and prove the existence of evolution and its validity. And so what are some of them, right? So I have 3 main examples of evidence for evolution. So we have fossils, right? Fossils that have been made millions of years ago that show that the living descendants of these ancestors are related based on the structure of the animal or, something like that. And then we have radioactive dating, which is essentially the comparing the ratio of the radioactive isotopes in the fossil of that in the atmosphere today. So it's just using carbon life and that kind of system to accurately date the piece of evidence that we found from the past. And then lastly, we have genetics. This is one of the more stronger pieces of evidence that we have. And we use, we know that genes are passed from one generation to the next. The DNA of the different species show that they all have common ancestors. So here is some examples of the human race and how we have evolved from the, apes and monkeys of hundreds of thousands of millions of years ago. Here we can see 5 million years ago was our first ancestor. Then since then it has branched off, and we can see a chimpanzee on the left, and then we can see our race, the Homo sapiens, on the right. And this shows that we are somehow related to chimpanzees, right? Do you guys have any questions so far for the first topic? No? Okay. So now we'll be talking about one of the main names that come up when we talk about evolution and natural selection, which is Charles Darwin. So who is Charles Darwin, right? He lived in the 18th, do you know?
No, 19th century.
Yeah, 1800s, yeah, 19th century. But did someone say that they know who Darwin is?
He is the man who proved that evolution was right by writing a book called I forgot the name.
The Origin of Species, that's correct. Very
The
good.
Origin of Species.
Yeah. So Darwin was a naturalist, as well as a geologist and biologist. And he's best known for his contributions in the science of evolution and that theory. After coming out of his college, he was only a beetle collector with no real purpose until he embarked on his mission to South America through the HMS Beagle. So on 1831, he traveled to South America, and on the way there, he read a lot of books about, theories of Charles Lyell and a number of other books to educate himself, on the topic of biology and evolution and stuff like that. And throughout his journey, he made some interesting discoveries, whether it was fossils of big, giant, sloth-looking animals or, giant armadillos, and maybe thought that they are related to the, armadillos and sloths of today's world. And, with that in mind, he continued this journey. But the most important discovery that he made was in the Galapagos Islands, which is home to iguanas, mockingbirds, tortoises, and finches. So what are finches, right? Finches are tiny birds that had lived in the Galapagos Islands. And when Darwin saw these birds, he found that on different islands, these finches had different shapes and sized beaks. And that made him question, why do finches on this island have, big, thick, and short beaks, while finches on those other islands have, long and sharp beaks, right? So this turned out to be one of the clues that led Darwin to developing the theory of evolution by natural selection. So after he went back home, he, as one student said before, he eventually wrote the book of Origin of Species, but before that, he wrote the Zoology of the Voyage of the HMS Beagle in a number of volumes from 1838 to 1843. And so this is basically what he saw on his journey and what he learned from this journey. And he concluded from this experience that living beings compete over resources and only the most fit for a given region survive. And we'll be going over this in more detail later, but fit does not necessarily mean athleticism or how strong the organism is. It's more how adapted the organism is for its environment to survive. It's its ability to survive, basically. So on the right, we can see a picture of the actual book that he wrote, which is The Origin of Species. So now we'll be going deeper into the process of natural selection and what it really is. So natural selection, as mentioned before, modifies the population. Essentially, the fittest survive and reproduce, passing on those favored traits to their offspring. For example, the longbeaks get more food and survive when the food becomes scarce. And the food's probably bugs or beetles and something like that. And the unfit species, so the finches with the thick, short beaks, die out, and the populations diverge into new species. So as I said before, the survival of the fittest is a term used to describe natural selection, but fitness is it's not the organism's strength or power, but rather the ability to survive and reproduce in an environment.
For example,
Do they have what?
okay, I came up with an example.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, a fish has two babies. One is white and one is very good camouflaged. The white one could be seen really, really easily and dies off. Therefore, none of the other, so therefore it has a less chance of surviving and having offspring. And the next one is camouflage, so it can hide away from predators and has a better chance of meeting someone and having offspring. Therefore, the trait is passed down to its offspring.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, it's a perfect example of natural selection and what we were talking about. Good job.
Yeah, that you basically said it correctly. In essence, natural selection is favoring those camouflaged fish because they have a higher than adaptation to reproduce later on, as you see that they're not being eaten by predators, so they can reproduce better. So that's a really great way of explaining it. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, so moving on, there's a number of conditions that describes the process of natural selection and how it occurs. The first is inherited variation. So this essentially means that there is a genetic variation within a population, which can then be inherited onto the offspring. And as you said before, the favored traits will then move on to its kids and children and the following generations, which will ultimately lead to that favored trait becoming the majority. And then there's competition. So this is where there is a struggle for survival, a limited number of resources, and species tend to produce more offspring than the environment can support, so that even if some die, some survive and can push through the competition of that environment. And then here's selection, the environmental pressures, right? The adaptations that will go on later that these species need to go through, which will lead to different reproduction within the population. And then there's the adaptations, which is where individuals with the favored traits can have a higher chance of living and passing their traits to their offspring. Yeah, and then lastly is evolution. This is over time, there is a change in the trait. Allele is basically another word for traits, frequency within a population gene pool. And these will all come together to essentially favor the good traits within a animal population to ultimately have those produce more offspring and become the new normal, essentially. So here are some pictures of what we just went over. So here's variation. So you can see that there's two colors of the same species of butterflies, which is a change in the genetics of each butterfly. Here's a yellow and brown. And then we can take that into number 2, which is competition. And there's overproduction of offspring that leads to the competition for survival.
So as a
Because
result,
the yellow ones don't. Because the yellow butterfly's offspring doesn't have very good camouflage.
yes,
Yeah.
you're right. That would be in adaptation and selection. But for number 2, competition is just showing that when, let's imagine a world where there's like an organism, right? And it's eating, like, as you see, there are 2 kinds of butterflies, the yellow and brown butterfly with their caterpillars, which need to eat. But as you see in number 2, there's not really a predator or another animal eating the butterfly or caterpillar yet. So as a result, there can be an overabundance of the caterpillars, and they're all then fighting for their food. So that's in essence called competition, as they compete to fight for like food sources, habitats, etc. to survive.
You know, sometimes they eat each other, and that's called cannibalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, kind of, yes.
So yeah. So number 3 is adaptations. And this is where you said before, it's where the favorite traits are more likely to survive. So we can see that the tree bark is brown. The tree is brown, and then there are 3 brown caterpillars, but those aren't being eaten because they're nicely hidden within the color of the tree. However, the yellow caterpillar is easily seen by the birds and therefore probably will die more than the brown ones. And so the brown ones are adapting nicely to its environment, which is why it's more favored.
But
And so this will, what did you say?
isn't butterflies poisonous?
Well,
Some
some are
are.
poisonous, but some of them are not.
Yeah.
And
So,
here's another example of evolution. So, for example, this is like today. Girls say that they like taller boys better. Therefore, they date taller boys and marry taller boys. Therefore, the trait is passed down, and we will go taller and taller and taller.
That's actually
Yeah,
a pretty good example. If it's more of like an extreme case, like, you know, because there's so many people on Earth. But in essence, if they're able to reproduce, you could say with taller boys, right? Our future generations will be taller and taller. And so natural
Exactly. That's what I
favors
just
taller
said.
boys. So, yeah, that's a good example. Good job.
good example, yeah.
Yeah, like if they're like more like if there's like a camouflage butterfly and like one that stands out, I guess, then like the survival of the fittest again, like the camouflage will win and then they'll start reproducing and then.
And I got another one, okay?
Yeah.
So back then, our ancestors used to walk with fur, and they used to walk like this. They used to chew their backs. And this was not a favorite trait, so we don't have any fur, and we walk straight.
Yes, that we are a result of bipedalism, because humans are really good like long distance runners in essence, and bipedalism, you know, as a result, it helps us balance. So it just goes to show like evolution can be determined by either a set of actions, because maybe we were standing up on our hind legs more often, which resulted in bipedalism or walking on 2 feet, or it could also be a result of genetic mutation. But in essence, evolution is like a combination of like all those factors combined. But yeah, so wait, David, where did we stop? Did we stop on adaptations or selection?
No.
Yeah, we just
I want to read
finished
about
adaptation.
adaptations.
Okay, we can go over adaptations again
So
then.
I get
Yeah,
this
okay.
Present on
I
this
get
for
this.
us.
I really get this thing because those caterpillars are blending. The brown person's caterpillars are really blending in, but the yellow caterpillars are colorful. Therefore, the birds always eat them. But colorful doesn't always mean not poisonous, and the birds die out. So now back
Yes,
to
that's a
brown
great point. David, do you have anything else to add to that?
To the adaptation?
There are more brown
Yes.
Yeah, so what this will lead to is as the young caterpillars die out while they're yellow and the brown caterpillars are able to live on, this will actually lead to number 4, which is selection. And over time, the brown caterpillars will grow into butterflies, and when they make offspring, they'll also be brown. And so in the population, there will be a abundance of brown butterflies compared to yellow ones, as the yellow ones died off more easily in the past. And this is basically how evolution will occur. So over, hundreds of years or tens of years, based on the lifespan of the organism, the favored trait will be the majority of the population. And we can see that there's more brown than yellow butterflies.
That's a great example.
Yeah, so I have a question for you guys. So we talked about finches, but can someone explain how finches are an example of natural selection?
Well, all these finches live in different areas and use different beaks to get different selections of their food.
And so over time, what do you think will happen to, some of these finches?
Well, it depends on where they live.
Yeah. If they're like adapted to their environment, then it's going to be them.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the numbered finches, you can see it's very thick and short beaks, right?
Wow, that's
Those
a
are
huge
usually
beak.
Yeah, those are usually used for nuts and hard
Like breaking out the nuts.
seeds. Yeah,
Therefore, they live in an area full of nuts.
exactly. So these are more favored for areas with nuts and seeds, and where they need thick, hard beaks. But number 4, you can see there is small. It's small and really sharp, right?
Yeah, they're a bit smaller in number 2.
Yeah.
In number 2,
But
they
then,
must be used for picking up. They must be used for digging in the ground and finding worms, like most birds, right?
yeah, maybe, or maybe just.
Those would be a better example because they have a slender beak, right? So when they're looking either for stuff in the ground, they kind of need a slender beak to catch on to, like, you could say, smaller organisms, or like getting, like, I don't know.
Beetles.
Good point.
Beetles, or like, hummingbirds, they need like the pollen or nutrients from flowers. They have very narrow beaks. So like, that's a good example that you could say of birds that use really small beaks or have really small beaks. And what they.
That is a good example.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we basically talked about this, but the beak shape, varies among these species, and different beaks are used for different environments, and that's why the favorite beaks go on to reproduce and produce more of those favorite beaks with their children. So here's another example. So can someone explain how antibiotic resistant bacteria work? So antibiotic resistant bacteria is where these bacteria, even when you give them medicine or try to treat them with different compounds, they don't die as usual bacteria would. But yeah, this is caused by mutation. But can someone explain how this is an example of natural selection?
This is. Let me read it.
You can kind of read the bottom, and it'll help you understand more.
But what David's trying to say is antibiotic resistance is a form of kind of not just natural selection, but adaptation as well. So maybe
antibiotic resistance will really help the species. Therefore, when a human gets infected and it takes antibiotics, the germs will already be immune to the antibiotics. What if that happens with the coronavirus? That would be bad.
Yeah. So like an antibiotic resistant, like one of them in there, it can start reproducing because it's able to fit. So
exactly.
that body builds like antibodies against that.
Yeah.
And
Like
the flu shot, kind of like injecting like a dead virus, so your body can build antibodies.
Perfect example. I was actually going to say something about a vaccine, because if you guys, who else is listening, you may or may not know, but whenever you get like a vaccine, like the flu shot or whatever, they give you kind of like a dead virus, so your immune system or white blood cells are already kind of affiliated with that. That's kind of a different form of, you could say, adaptation, but particularly in antibiotic resistance, it can be more than just, you could say, with bacteria. Like, you also get like drug resistance with like cancer cells. There's a huge another field about that. But basically is, right, these cells they're kind of like small living organisms in their own aspect in which they want to be able to reproduce. I think some of you probably attended our few sessions ago. We had a mitosis session, right? So cells.
Yeah, I remember that. I was there.
Exactly. So cells need to divide, right? They need to reproduce as well to form additional cells. So they have two options of doing so. First, they're able to do it with their current environment, or second, if their current environment is like not suitable for reproducing, then they need to adapt to it. So we see this on a cellular level at the antibiotic resistance, in this case with bacteria, which it could be a variety of reasons why bacteria become antibiotic resistant. Over time, scientists think it's because of like certain mutations that occur, or like, I don't know, certain like probably nucleic DNA changes, within the bacteria in itself. Because when they realize, oh gosh, there's this threat of this antibiotic that's trying to kill us, we're the bacteria, right? So we don't want that antibiotic to kill us.
If we're the bacteria, we need a better chance of surviving. Therefore, we could evolve with a trait called antibiotic resistance.
Exactly.
Exactly.
We won't be,
okay.
we won't die that quickly. And we'll have a chance to pass on our traits to the offspring.
Exactly. So a lot of studies, if you just look up what are differences between antibiotic resistant bacteria and just regular bacteria, you'll see a lot of scientific studies showing how their DNA, and DNA, if you guys all know, is like the genetic information within like living organisms, is very different, because in essence, the bacteria or even other cells which have drugs attached to them are able to manipulate themselves and pass on those traits to their future offspring to ensure that they survive even in the presence of antibiotics. So that's kind of antibiotic resistant.
Yeah.
This is some great discussion, guys. I want to make sure we have enough time to hit on everything. So why don't we move on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, my sound cut off for a second. So, can you guys hear me?
David, do you have two screens open?
Yeah.
We can hear you, but you're a little echoey.
I think you have
Okay.
two screens
You have
open.
a double voice. Kind
I
of.
have two screens open.
Okay, now it's
Yeah.
better. Now it's better. I don't think, now it's better. Oh, what?
Well, it turned off.
That's okay. You just need to reshare.
Yeah, I think maybe you had two screens open when the sound cut off. We are facing technical difficulties.
Okay. Sorry. Can you guys see my screen again?
You're echoing, David. I think you have two tabs open or something.
And we can also not see your screen.
Oh yeah, we can.
Okay.
Are you sharing it on one Zoom platform and not the other? And then you're kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like you have two like Zoom sessions going on, because we're hearing an echo in your voice.
It's like a double voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a really big echo though. It's little.
Yes, I think we would be fine if you just want to share and continue moving on.
Okay. Let me